Steven, this is for Plan B.
Plan B? Oh, son of a... Oh, God. Voicemail from Tyler?
Hello, Steven. If you're listening to this, you've just awoken from unconsciousness. What you said earlier really upset me. As punishment, you have to do the next movie you're reviewing on your own. Good luck.
That son of a bitch right well knows that I can't do these reviews without him. He's the one who watches most of the movies with me. I suppose I can look to one of my pending projects to see if I can work on anything. Dang it, I watched this one with Tyler. Too many people have done this one recently. What's this doing here? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my first Top 10 episode where I'll be covering my Top 10 cartoons. Now given that these are my Top 10, this'll be my criteria. These are 10 cartoons that I'm giving recognition because they either held a place in my childhood that still lives on, or that I discovered years after they were created but wound up enjoying a lot anyway. This list was a little difficult to narrow down, so here are my runner-ups. Scooby-Doo, the first talking dog you ever think of when you hear the phrase talking dog. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, something that literally brought pretend creatures to life. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, a show about two kids, an idiot and a cynic, gaining the Grim Reaper as their best friend. And Ed, Edd and Eddy. Strange and repetitive, but very entertaining. Now without further ado, here are my top 10 cartoons. Number 10. The Fairly OddParents. A 10-year-old named Timmy Turner is given fairy godparents, a husband and wife named Cosmo and Wanda, to balance out his otherwise rather miserable life of neglectful parents and a mean babysitter. This show started off as a series of shorts on Nickelodeon before it managed to kick off and have an official show. Start off with the theme song.
Timmy is an average kid that no one understands. Mom and Dad and Vicky always giving him commands. Time's magic little fish who grant his every wish, 'cause in reality they are his odd parents, fairly odd parents.
That's a fun way to get the show's premise out there so you don't have to be confused about what you're watching. Given that it's magic, this presents a virtually infinite realm of creativity of wishes that could be made by a 10-year-old boy. Given that terrible things could be done with this power, there is a book called The Rules that dictates limitations of fairy magic. Can't use it to win a contest, can't interfere with true love, and other such stuff to make sure that some kid can't just take over the world with this magic. And for the record, yes, the book is called The Rules. And I'll admit there are a few other things about this show that don't make sense to me. Exhibit A. A fairy's magic is powerless against a butterfly net. It's funny because... they have wings like a butterfly? Seriously, that just doesn't make any sense! Exhibit B. There are conditions to having godparents, one being that the godchild cannot tell anybody that he or she has them, otherwise they lose their godparents and their memories are wiped of ever having them. This is something that also happens when kids grow up and no longer need fairies. However, there's an episode where he briefly loses them just for not saying thank you, and he doesn't lose those memories. And toilet jokes. Rather tame ones, thankfully. Each episode generally revolves around learning a lesson in humility and manners. Given that it's a 10-year-old with magic fairies at his disposal, these morals are learned a bit more painfully than how a real person would, and it's a fun ride to go on. The characters aren't as strong in this show as some other shows might be. From one moment to the next, there's not as much emotional build-up so much as intentional yelling and setups for the next jokes, and then you just get to the Tara strong voice and Timmy Turner, oh yeah! A couple of those minor things aside, I really like the show. It's silly, but it employs enjoyable satire as well as randomness for its comedy. For a children's show, this also did pretty well with continuity, ongoing character arcs, and interesting situations. There were even a few movies that crossed over with Jimmy Neutron. That was probably one of the greatest crossovers I've ever seen in my life. Well, aside from the obvious ones. Critical issues, yeah, not gonna lie. The silliness of this series probably does wear off its charm for a lot of people. Not for me though, which is why it gets the number 10 spot. By the way, if you're wondering why I think of that Fairly OddParents live-action movie starring Drake Bell, don't. Just don't. Number 9. Dilbert. This started as what I saw to be a very boring comic strip. Working at a software company? Oh, the hilarity. In the show, Dilbert is an engineer instead. And given this is a cartoon, that makes the possibility for other kinds of humor virtually limitless. The characters are greatly entertaining. And they're well defined too, even if they are rather simple. Alice, the bossy woman, Wally, the slacker, the incompetent boss who remains nameless, Ashok, the clueless intern, and Dilbert, the only man on the planet with a sense of morality. We're also joined by some lovable side characters such as Loud Howard, Dogbert, Ratbert, Catbert, and Dilmom. I have absolutely no idea why they did that with their names. It just sounds stupid to me. The show has a very unique sense of humor. The office setting isn't accurately portrayed as far as a real-world standard is concerned, but I think the cynicism that every character speaks with and every cynical view they hold about the world fits the tone just perfectly. Again, given this is a cartoon, other bizarre situations are possible, situations that the comic just didn't have the scope for. If I had to recommend it to somebody and all that I just explained wasn't quite enough, I would say Dilbert is The Office with the dial turned all the way up. The cartoon was great enough on its own merit, but it also has the stamp of approval and the stamp of creativity of the creator of the comic strip, Scott Adams. That shows that even though it started out as a simple comic strip, he was capable of some pretty good vision. While there are only 2 seasons for a total of 30 episodes, they're all available on either YouTube or Netflix to watch for free, so there is no reason why I think you shouldn't check this show out. Dilbert, one of the most underrated cartoons I've ever watched. Number 8. Tom and Jerry. When I wind back the clock to classic cartoons, it rarely gets more basic than this. Tom and Jerry were a literal manifestation of cat and mouse, with massive amounts of pain added. There are fewer simple pleasures in life greater than watching 2 cartoon characters beating each other up in various scenarios, and the twists they make to the formula are really good. Sometimes they have to reconcile briefly to defeat a common foe. Sometimes one of Jerry's relatives comes to town and gives Tom a piece of his mind. Occasionally, Tom tries to call a third power to take care of Jerry. Sometimes, a recurring dog character named Spike gets involved for more than just beating up Tom because Tom accidentally gets him instead of Jerry. There's even an episode where the 3 try to put aside their differences. That's just a couple of the ways they change up, and even the littlest of changes can do wonders to extend the life of a show like this. Similarly, for me, it's good in small doses. A little every now and then won't drive my enjoyment of it into the ground, and that's good, because I don't want to lose my love for this simple classic. And if you have to wonder what I think of the Tom and Jerry movie, the Nostalgia Critics review kept me well away from that, which is probably good for the purity of my childhood. Tom and Jerry, cat and mouse at its best. Number 7. The classic Disney and Looney Tunes cartoons. I'm putting these 2 together because of their similar styles. They're lower on the list than some might think they deserve because I didn't actually watch too many of these growing up. I feel I have watched enough to understand what they're about and can deem them superior to Tom and Jerry for this reason. They're very basic cartoons as well. Not a whole lot of story, not a whole lot of explanation. What you see is what you get. Usually a very slapsticky bunch, they're quite entertaining in their simplicity. The characters, well very simply defined, are very memorable. Even though I haven't watched many and they aren't my favorites, I still respect them for being colossal landmarks in the evolution of cartoons. When I first watched the goofy cartoon Hockey Homicide a couple years back, I couldn't remember a previous time where I had laughed harder. In fact, a lot of what these characters did in their cartoons would make a resurgence in the 90s to influence other shows. We'll get to those later. Their strongest suit was their characters. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone who cannot name a massive percentage of these characters. Even now, in a time where fans sometimes strive for complexity and depth for a character to be memorable, these were characters that were as simple as could be, and all the more awesome for it. Both parties have tried to put newer versions of their shows out there. I've watched a few episodes of the Looney Tunes show. It's not quite the same, but it's still mildly amusing to me. Now, a show I really enjoyed was House of Mouse. Here's the premise. Mickey Mouse is the host of a nightclub, the House of Mouse, where every animated Disney character gets together to sit back, watch some old classic Disney cartoons as well as some new ones. In addition, there would always be a story going on within the House of Mouse. This show allowed Disney to show some of its creativity with new ideas, as well as showcase classics to a new generation of cartoon viewers. In fact, you might as well consider House of Mouse on this list as number 7 along with the classic Disney and Looney Tunes cartoons, because it's giving Disney a chance to showcase their old classics because they're just that awesome. The classic cartoons of Disney and Looney Tunes, because it really doesn't get more classic than that. Number 6. Futurama. In this show, delivery boy Philip J. Fry, more commonly known as simply Fry, accidentally freezes himself in a cryogenic pod in the year 1999 on New Year's Eve. The pod keeps him frozen and he wakes up in the year 3000. After joining up with Bender, a bending robot, and Taranga Leela, a one-eyed alien woman, they find Hubert Farnsworth, Fry's distant nephew, commonly known as the Professor, who runs a delivery company that they all wind up working for. Along the way, we are introduced to the Professor's student, Amy Wong, the medical expert, Dr. Zoidberg, and bureaucrat Hermes Conrad. This show takes place in the future, and as such, plays a lot on the idea of future technology. A lot of its humor does derive from things happening in the future that hold a lot of relevance to pop culture nowadays, and it satirizes those things wonderfully. Not to mention, it's created some of the best internet memes we've got. But even aside from being great satire, it comes up with great storylines and jokes all on its own. A common theme I consider when I rate something is its characters, and these characters are pretty interesting. Immoral, an easy target, idiot, cynical genius, and idiot. It's great stuff. But Futurama has a colorful cast of side characters with simple but well-defined personalities that make plenty of small appearances that are always fun to watch. If I had to pick favorites on side characters, I'd probably pick the news anchors and Hedonism Bot. It was a shame to hear it was taken off the air as soon as it was, and relieving to hear that it was coming back with all new episodes, most of which I've enjoyed pretty well so far. I hope they keep going strong for a little while, and I do hope that the show is allowed to end on a really high note. Futurama, unlike some shows, isn't losing its stride. Hint, hint. Number 5. Codename Kids Next Door. This show takes a very interesting premise. It's a spy-themed show about kids who are in an organization to liberate kids from the oppression of adults. Not flat out rebel, just prevent some of the greater injustices that adults put upon kids. Granted, the situations in the show are a little extreme, and the villainy of the adults exaggerate to the very extreme evil. But it's a cartoon, so that's expected. What matters is how well it works. Even though it's a silly cartoon at heart and leaves time to be intentionally silly, it plays it straight, takes itself seriously, and expands these otherwise small issues of being a kid against adults to an epic scale, making it an epic experience to watch. One of my favorite reviewers of ThatGuyWithTheGlasses.com, the Blockbuster Buster, made a top 10 cartoons that should be movies, and he put Kids Next Door on the list, saying that it would put the Spy Kids movies to shame. As someone who's reviewed Spy Kids more or less recently, I can sympathize. Kids Next Door is something that Spy Kids should have been. Seriously, this show may be silly sounding and quite silly looking when animated, but it's played out in such a serious way you can't help but get invested. If I didn't know better, I'd say this cartoon was made by super genius kids with big dreams of sticking it to the grown-up man. And that's what this show was all about. Kids Next Door, the real Spy Kids. Number 4. Death Note. I know Death Note is an anime which is not usually included in the general category of cartoons and is usually its own separate thing, but I feel like I should include it on this list because, for me, there's something that sets it apart from Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Bleach, Naruto, and other such Japanese creations. It's about a Japanese high school student, like Yagami, who finds a mysterious notebook called a Death Note. It's a rather simple tool. You write someone's name in the book and they die of a heart attack. After finding it, Light gains some kind of god complex and starts killing off criminals in order to create a better world. This show is very intricate and works with itself so well. I don't have time to discuss other details like the rules of the Death Note, different ways you can manipulate death, how convoluted the story can become because of scheming, but there's so much awesomeness in it. Light finds this great power and uses it to murder people, which seems evil without context, but as you watch the story play out, it brings out a moral conflict similar to the one done by the Saw franchise. Who is truly the hero and villain? Is Light an evil psycho, or are the police out of line by trying to find out who it is and stop him? Throw in the fact that Light's father is chief of police, and that Light winds up being a prime suspect in the Kidra investigation, and you've got quite the supernatural detective story. And I know a thing or two when it comes to detective stuff. What's more, this show tells a story in a manageable amount of time. Other animes tend to stretch themselves out. Naruto had over 200 episodes and continues with Shippuden. Pokemon, good god, don't even get me started at how many they're up to by now. Death Note, 37 episodes. I kid you not, there's only 37 episodes. That's the entire series. And this is the one anime series for which I've read the original manga. And the show is basically like they're peeling pages out of the manga and just bringing them to life. For an adaptation, there is no second best. Death Note. Even if you don't like anime that much, this is pretty damn awesome. Just don't bring your own Death Notes to school or anything. People have gotten suspended for that sort of thing. Number 3. Batman the Animated Series. I will admit to being a little bit of a bandwagoner on this one. It started out with the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. Everyone kept talking about how they're so awesome. So eventually I just caved in and I saw them and I liked them. I liked them quite a bit actually. Eventually that drew my interest to other things Batman related, so when whiff of Batman the Animated Series got to me, another cartoon that I knew about but hadn't watched when I was a kid, I started getting into that too, and I will not deny, it's pretty awesome as well. Start with the fact that we lived in a time where superhero cartoons generally looked like this. And the history of previous Batman shows were filled mostly with this.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
And then some people just got together and managed to create this. Now that is pretty awesome. One thing I like in my cartoons is a dark theme. Not that I don't like lighthearted cartoons, there's plenty of those on this list already. But there are certain things I like to take seriously. This show does what Batman has always done, takes silly looking villains and does some creative things with them. I'm sure everyone knows by now, but Mark Hamill played the Joker. I've seen some pretty crazy things in my life, and that's something I'm still trying to wrap my mind around. Luke Skywalker is the Joker. That's the ultimate mindfuck as far as I'm concerned. The best thing about it though is that it's still marketed as a show technically for kids. They still include some cheeky moments in there that are quite enjoyable to watch. Anytime Batman interacts with Catwoman or the Joker, it's great. Hell, the Joker doesn't even need Batman to command our attention and bring forth our laughter, which of course is his purpose. For its darker stories though, I'm really glad they took the risk by taking the audience seriously. It paid off so well that eventually, when making video games like Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, they turned back to the guys behind the animated series and got them to work. Wouldn't you know it, the games go to an even darker level than the show while retaining its original spirit quite well. Batman the Animated Series.
Because I'm Batman.
Number 2. Animaniacs. This is another show in the back of my mind that I knew existed, but never really watched it. I also never really knew what it was called and didn't think it was very good until I got a reliable recommendation. That's another thank you I owe to the Nostalgia Critic. I started watching it several months ago and I was hooked in pretty easy. Why not? They created a group of siblings actually called the Warner Brothers. They were essentially revised cutouts of the classic Looney Tunes cartoons that had little more than violence in them. The revision had lots of new intelligent jokes to the classic formula. And if you ever got tired of the Warner siblings, God knows how that's possible, there were many different kinds of cartoons on Animaniacs, a whole extravaganza of them. They had the Goodfeathers, which parodied gangster stereotypes with pigeon characters. Slappy Squirrel followed the life of a grumpy former cartoon star. Pinky and the Brain told an evil scientist and his assistant story so well, It eventually was made into its own show, which I unfortunately haven't been able to watch much of. There are characters like Dr. Scratch and Sniff, Hello Nurse, Chicken Boo, Rita and Runt, Flavio and Merida. Okay, I will admit, these hippo characters, I hated them. But they didn't show up much, and every other character was pretty solid. It's nice to see that even years after the show's cancellation, its voice actors go to conventions and are greeted by an enthusiastic fan base of the great work they did. Animaniacs, a great revision to the formula of classic cartoons. And my number one cartoon, Teen Titans. My interests change with time, but this always remains one of my favorite shows. It generally advertised itself as a fun children's comedy show about superheroes, which it played to pretty well, but it also had some deep, ongoing storylines, good action, and great characters. The 5 main Titans were all interesting characters with good backstory and motivation. What I really like about each individual season is the main villain that shows up. It's always someone who is mysterious, dark, and threatening with a capital T, pun intended. The show also had a wonderful cast of voice actors. One of my voiceover idols, Tara Strong, played Raven. Scott Menville played Robin in the best way I've seen Robin portrayed. John DiMaggio as Brother Blood was a good motivator for Cyborg in the season he appeared in. And even though I knew next to nothing about the character of Deathstroke, known as Slade in the cartoon, Ron Perlman put on such an intimidating, dark, mysterious performance as the character that I don't need to know. What I see on the show already makes Slade one of my favorite villains of all time. What was marketed as a children's show didn't necessarily bring new stuff to the table, but it brought good stuff. It was more balanced than Batman the Animated Series, as it did allow itself to be a lot more lighthearted at times. I was sad to see it taken off the air as soon as it was. A reboot is coming called Titans Go that will play to the comedic style of the new Teen Titans shorts they've been showing on DC Nation. While I would have preferred a straight-up Season 6 of Teen Titans, I'm going to give this new show a chance and hope that the popularity of that show will spark an official Season 6. In the meantime, the original Teen Titans cartoon has many great things to fall back on. Teen Titans, my number one cartoon. Now I know there are a few cartoons out there that people are probably wondering why the hell are they not on this list? Well, I will answer that with I was born in 1993. The cartoons I was exposed to when I was a kid were a little different than some of the ones that might be popular with most internet critics nowadays. Now, I'm not dissing them or anything. I'm not saying they're bad cartoons. I just haven't really watched them and therefore can't justify putting them on a list like this. Now, if you think I'd enjoy these shows, I'd be happy to take your recommendations for them and give them a try. And in contrast, if you think based on your interest watching this list, you think there are a couple shows on here you might want to try out, I highly recommend you give them a try. Well, thank you for watching. Until next time. So many clips. Next time it's a top 5, dang it.
All cartoons are fucking dicks. They get dick kicks from being pricks. It's a quirk we just can't fix, 'cause all cartoons are fucking dicks.